Shabbat shalom. As someone who loves movies, I'd say there are a handful of films that I tend to rewatch about every 10 years, and then I obsess over them for about a month afterwards. And right now, I'm on a Godfather kick. I heard all the men go, Godfather movies 1 and 2. I don't bother with number 3 because that movie is garbage. The first 2 Godfather films are considered some of the greatest pieces of cinema ever made. Of course, put Francis Ford Coppola on the map. About 10 years ago, Genevieve and I were living in Los Angeles, and she was pregnant with our first son. And I had quoted some line from The Godfather, but she didn't know where it came from. So I decided that it was time for her to be initiated into the family. And despite her persisting at first, we watched The Godfather 1 and 2. And I kept telling her, I said, look, by watching these movies, someday all of these pop culture references from these movies will ultimately pay off. I think she just watched them to shut me up. Whatever, I'll take it. For those of you who might not have ever seen these 2 iconic films, in the second movie there's a very powerful scene where the mafia boss's wife, played by Diane Keaton, she tells her husband that while he thought she accidentally miscarried the baby she was pregnant with, in reality, she purposely says she had an abortion to prevent giving birth to another generation of crime boss. If you watch this movie, this scene is incredibly powerful. Diane Keaton is screaming, "It was an abortion!" And like I said, while we were watching this very emotional scene, Genevieve was heavily pregnant, and this had a big impact on her. So for days afterwards, she thought about this scene. We talked about it. And by the way, this is what good cinema does. It stays with you. You think about it. Well, about a week after we had watched these movies, we were walking around campus at American Jewish University, where I went to rabbinical school. We actually lived in the apartment complex up there on campus, which is a beautiful space off of Mulholland Drive. And as we were passing the student center, I saw someone standing there that looked familiar. She was someone that I knew, but I didn't know. So I did a double take and I looked again, and she noticed me looking at her and she said, "Yes, it's me." It was Diane Keaton. Oscar-winning, iconic, amazing, Diane Keaton was standing there talking to me. I found out later that apparently her daughter worked on campus with a group of some of the disabled students who learned there, and so she, Mom, was touring the school. So my wife and I start talking to Diane Keaton, and we told her, I said, we just watched The Godfather. And she said, "Oh yeah? How does it hold up?" Now, you know me, I usually have a lot to say in most situations. But Diane Keaton asking me about The Godfather was too much. So in my only defense, I just stood there, unable to say anything, jaw on the floor, starstruck. However, my heavily pregnant wife spoke up and said, "Oh my goodness, Diane." She called her Diane. I didn't know you could do that. "Oh my goodness, Diane, the scene where you confronted Michael about the abortion was so powerful, and you hated him." And then she just kept going. And then my wife and Diane Keaton just started talking about The Godfather. And then they started talking about pregnancy pains and childbirth. And all I could do there was stand there in complete shock. And then my wife hugged Diane Keaton. I didn't know you could do that either. I was weirded out. I stood there awkwardly. We all gave a casual goodbye. And as we were walking back to our apartment, I said, "See, aren't you glad we watched The Godfather?" One of the major themes in this series of films is the idea of how to juxtapose business and personal life simultaneously. And you hear this phrase throughout the Godfather films. They say, it's not personal, it's business. It's not personal, this is business. But I noticed something. The criminal underworld in this series of films is called the Five Families, all of whom are from Italy. So everyone is related. Everyone celebrates, everyone mourns together. You invite the Don of the other family to your father's wedding, even though he might be planning a hit on you or your son next week. Why? Because it's not personal, it's business. And what is good for the family is good for business. Another theme that is talked about is child favoritism. While Fredo is technically the older brother, he's not selected to be the head of the Corleone family. It's his younger brother, Michael, instead, who is chosen. What could go wrong with that, right? Now, because our Torah often reads like a better movie script than Hollywood could have written, we see these exact same things and themes in Parshat Vayechi, our Parsha for this morning. In our Parsha, we get the very dramatic death scene of Jacob, where he blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. But let's back up in our story and just review for a moment. And let's see how we got to this scene in the Torah in the first place. Jacob is also the second-born. His older twin, Esau, is born just moments before him. Actually, Jacob comes out holding Esau's heel. But before they are even born, there is a prophecy from God to Rebekah saying, quote, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples will be separated from your body, and one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Oi. Later, when Jacob has kids, he encourages this same favoritism. His son Joseph has dreams where his family all bows down to Joseph. And how does Jacob react? He doesn't correct the situation. No, he gives Joseph a beautiful, multicolored coat to show the other siblings that they have been passed over as his favorite son. And then just when you think it couldn't get any worse, right before he dies, Jacob does the same thing again. Except this time it's with his grandchildren, Joseph's sons. As he is giving Ephraim and Manasseh his deathbed blessing, the Torah tells us that Jacob crosses his arms. He puts his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though he's the older son, and he completely passes him over. And instead, he gives Ephraim the blessing of the firstborn, which he is not. Ephraim is the secondborn. And Joseph even notices the mistake, and he corrects his father, and he says, "Dad, you have the order mixed up." But what does Jacob say in response? This is the quote. Quote, "I know, my son, I know. Manasseh too will become a people, and he too will be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations." Sound familiar? Now, what exactly is Jacob saying in here? In my opinion, this sounds an awful lot like it's not personal, it's business. I used to kind of think about this mantra, but lately I've thought about it differently. Because I'll tell you what you already know. It's impossible to truly separate business life from personal life. And just repeating the mantra over and over and over does little to actually change the situation. When you live within the family or even within a community like we do, it can be very hard to navigate through the personal and the business. I can remember when I was in rabbinical school, the dean of Ziegler once told us, he said, quote, "The rabbinate might be the most interesting job because the same people you serve are the same people that decide your livelihood. You'll bury their parents and later they'll decide what dental plan you get." Like I said, navigating the personal and the business is easier said than done. I want to end this sermon by noting and by possibly ruining the Godfather films for you. I'm sorry, but seeing as how the second one came out in 1974, I figured if you want to watch these movies, you already would have. These are not happy films. Now, they're amazing and they're intriguing, but the familia, it doesn't end with kumbaya or a group hug. And while the characters in these movies have mansions and cars and wealth and power, you find out by the end of the movie they're actually miserable. They hate themselves, they hate one another. And the whole irony of these characters is that they insist they're very religious. The Godfather, after all, is a Catholic position. But I think in reality of the situation, they've all lost sight of what is most important. Not cars or money or power. They've lost sight of God. Dear friends, I get that the mantra, personal is personal and business is business. But if we really believe that to be true, as I once did, I found to be that we're only fooling ourselves. The things that we do and the things that we say to one another have an effect. And if we harm one another, it builds resentment. And we're required to do teshuvah. But there's one thing that I've noticed. People who truly follow God, the people that put God first, study His ways, study His Torah, do mitzvot. I've noticed that those people might not have big mansions or fancy cars. They might not have money and they might not have power, but they have true happiness, which is more precious than gold. So this morning, I'll ask us to think about our dealings, whether personal or business. Have we wronged someone? Should we do teshuvah? Can we avoid the destruction within our own familia? And also, have we implored God to be in our lives and to help us? We need to seek Hashem out, for He is the true God, Father. And I promise you, if you ask for His help, He'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Shabbat Shalom.